Has been
Subjective.
prepared at Point Colorado. Use it if you have to. Out.
That's a grenade.
No, it's not.
I mean, that was a grenade, but... This is Arma Reforger, a bold and brave take into the FPS world from the developers of Arma Bohemia Interactive. And explaining what Arma Reforger kind of is a little confusing for most people. Now, Arma Reforger is a standalone title. It's a 1980s Soviet conflict between a US faction and Soviet faction. But what it really is a test bed for the brand new Arma engine called the Enfusion engine. And this engine has been undergoing a lot of work ever since its partial introduction to DayZ. Now, the DayZ engine is a hybrid of the Enfusion engine and isn't a pure Enfusion engine game, and in order for the Arma developers to bring about a really solid FPS experience that's optimized, runs well, and works like a charm for everything that Arma needs to do, they needed a brand new engine for that. So in many ways, Arma Reforger is more or less a test bed for the creation of Arma 4, which is going to come in a couple years' time. This is an open source, fully moddable environment that will allow people to create the content that they want to make, and will allow the Arma community the ability to steer the direction of Arma 4. If certain mods are specifically popular, or certain features are needed, wanted, or asked for, they will end up in the Enfusion engine prior to the release of Arma 4, which will come again in a couple years' time. This game is an early access game, it's priced like an early access game, it cost me €25 to purchase, and you might be wondering why it exists. And the answer to that is very simple. With a brand new engine, testing it and getting it to work as hard as it can to achieve everything you want it to do can be very difficult. For Arma especially, they want these servers to be capable of housing, up to potentially 300 players, using physics-based processes for gunfights, AI, all the various armaments in the game like tanks, helicopters, and jets, and making sure that all of those things work effectively without crashing servers, without causing engine hiccups, without making the game run badly. And if you've played Arma 3, like myself, you'll know that that game is the least optimized and one of the worst running games possibly ever produced. It doesn't matter whether you have a supercomputer or you're playing on a Nokia brick phone, that game just doesn't run well. Now, although Arma Reforger doesn't have tanks, doesn't have helicopters or jets, it does have a very robust brand new engine in the Enfusion engine. Shadows work better, the graphics look better, lighting works better. The ability to render in things in distance like grass and shadows is way better in this version than it was in Arma 3. And they've managed to achieve all of this whilst making the game run better. Now, I've done some tests so far, and in general gameplay thus far with around 60 to 100 players, I was getting anywhere between 90 to 120 FPS on a 5950X and a 3080. And there were some situations with large numbers of AI where things were getting really intense, and I spawned them in using the various game editors in-game to see what would happen. And even with loads of AI squads spawned in and heavy firefights happening, which are all physics-based, I was still floating in and around 80 to 100 frames. In comparison, in Arma 3, I would be looking probably sub 60 FPS. So this new Enfusion engine will act as a brand new optimized base for Arma, which is something that's super important. A few FPS here and there can really change the audience for a video game. And recently, when Squad patched its game to make it a little lower on the frame rate side of things, for shadow rendering, there was a huge uproar about it because some people couldn't play the game as they wanted to. I play a lot of hardcore shooters, I play a lot of military simulator titles, but Arma has never interested me because I know it doesn't run well, and I know it requires far too much work to enjoy the game. The UI is clunky, there's 700 keys for everything, and the game runs like hot garbage even if you have a supercomputer. And out of the box right away, Arma Reforger runs better, has seemingly simplified UI that's way more accessible to somebody like myself, and the basic keybinds out of the box are much easier and much more simple and something that I enjoy. It's far more a pick up and play experience compared to Arma 3, which feels like you have to work a 9-to-5 job just to get the game to do something fun. So Arma Reforger really is a test. It's a test to understand the engine, understand its limitations and problems, and make things as optimized as possible. Now, like I said, it doesn't have jets or tanks or helicopters, but those things will slowly make their way into this game, and they'll be able to produce the most optimized variants of those things in order to ensure that the game runs really well. But just looking at the Enfusion engine, the potential here is limitless. This runs so much better than anything they've ever done before. You know, you can zip around and dart around the map in the Game Master mode, which is their equivalent of Arma 3's Zeus, at super fast speeds, and stuff just renders in and looks good. So if you're looking to buy a polished AAA experience that has lots of content, don't buy Arma Reforger. It's nothing like that. It's very limited in content and ultimately is going to be acting as a test bed for Arma 4. Give it a couple of months and there should be a good influx of content, updates, and generally speaking modding experiences that will make Arma Reforger worthwhile in terms of playing. I can already imagine the number of modes, the number of crazy things that people are going to do with this, and I really feel as though the infinite levels of content that are achievable in Arma, as we've seen in Arma 3, because at the bare minimum it will run better, and more importantly it's far more accessible and pick up and play than it ever has been before. I think I was most impressed with what I've seen so far when I was on a relatively full server of about 100 players, and I was in a truck driving around and being shot at, and I wasn't noticing any hitching, lagging, desync, things that plague Arma titles traditionally and make it a very unenjoyable and immersive braking experience just weren't present in the Enfusion engine. It's even an issue in DayZ. Cars in DayZ are like death traps, but suddenly in Arma Reforger, I was able to drive around this stunning map, which has fantastic graphics by the way, and just enjoy the experience on a loaded server. And that's not something that Arma players are used to. Now, this game has released on Xbox, but I think a lot of work is going to be required in order for Arma to resemble a decent console experience, and they'll definitely have to have a more simplified version of controls for console players versus PC players who have far more options. But generally speaking, I don't think it's a bad thing that console is involved, because it will guarantee that the engine stays optimized and performs in certain ways, and will guarantee a certain quality of life expectation of the game. I think with Arma 3, the devs just sort of kept adding stuff, and even though it was broken, unoptimized, and didn't run well, it was just sort of accepted that that was how things were meant to be. You can't do that on console, you can't do that with Xbox, and you definitely can't do that with PlayStation, or your game would simply be removed from the store. So it's really interesting that they've kind of got this commitment going on here. I don't think it will make Arma a more simplified or dumbed down game, because although Arma is a niche game, that's what makes it unique, fun, and enjoyable, and changing that would be a terrible idea. And I think the developers are aware of that, and the odds of there being kind of a separate branch for consoles which operates a little bit differently from the PC branch and does things a little bit more simple is definitely something I could imagine them doing. But this is very exciting. Arma Reforger runs really well, and for those of you who are unaware, Arma 3's Zeus mode and general content creation and modding is an infinite source of content. You can create entire combat scenarios versus AI versus PvP. You can have full-blown military operations that you have crafted and created anywhere across this massive 50-odd kilometer square map. And that is incredible. You can take screenshots. You could have AI versus AI. You could do 10 PvP players versus 100 and something AI if you wanted to. And you can do all of this in real time while somebody is in a mode called the Game Master mode, akin to like Dungeons and Dragons, controlling all the strings, pulling all the buttons, pressing all the switches, and adding different assets and making new scenarios on the fly. It's really, really impressive. The infinite level of content for Arma comes from modding, it comes from the Game Master / Zeus variant, and the reason Arma has been around for so long is the ability to literally manipulate the game into doing whatever you want, whenever you want to do it. And they seem to be making that even more accessible to somebody like me. I found that quite overwhelming in the Zeus mode, but I found it really easy to understand in the Game Master mode. And on top of that, the modding community for Arma is more or less undefeated. The reason PUBG exists is because of Arma. The reason DayZ exists is because of Arma. And I can guarantee you the endless amount of content that will come from this in the future will not only be really fun to play, but it will also steer the direction of the future Arma 4 title. Now, I know some people are disappointed. Some people are upset that this isn't Arma 4 and they haven't released Arma on the Enfusion engine. But the reality is that if they did that right now, it would be buggy, unoptimized, and run like a mess. I honestly feel like it was a really brave decision from Bohemia Interactive, because not only does it allow them to really stress test this engine and make sure that they optimize things correctly, but it also gives the community a direct say in what's going to happen in Arma 4. I think that's really important and really impressive. But again, if you're looking for a polished AAA experience with lots of content, do not buy this game. This is for technical nerds who enjoy technical things like me, and generally could be a decent FPS experience after some modding and after some updates over the coming weeks and months. Let me know what you think of Arma Reforger, especially those of you on console. I'm interested to see whether this is a game that you're actually even remotely interested in. And as always folks, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you again in the next video.